Today I'm going to the Chicago Botanic Garden and we're going to see all the trees on display and the trees for sale at the 44th Annual Midwest Bonsai Society Show and Sale. So I've been going to this event for a number of years, and I actually got started in this hobby back when I was in 4th grade, and it was because I went to the Chicago Botanic Garden with my parents one summer day. It happened to be on one of the days that the festival was going on, so I unexpectedly saw all these crazy, awesome looking trees. I saw that there was stuff for sale you could buy. I picked up my first Procumbens Juniper, and it died in a couple of weeks. And then since then, as time went on, elementary school, middle school, I was always trying to figure out how to grow these trees until I finally figured it out. However, I still like going to this festival because in Northern Illinois, this is one of the only times where there's a larger diversity of pre-bonsai material you can buy, and of course, a lot of cool stuff that gets rotated around through the years that other hobbyists bring and display, and you can see some really great trees. So I'm going to take you on this trip, show you what they have, and hopefully I'm going to find some good trees to buy. I'm looking for some cork bark pines and a nice refined juniper if they have one. So let's go take a look and see what this year's show and sale is going to look like. So of course I'm going to start this off with International Bonsai. This is Bill Valvanis's table, and I got my best juniper from him about 5 to 6 years ago, and every year he's brought great stuff, and this year it's no exception, so I ended up getting one of my cork bark pines from him. So I get there bright and early in the morning because I want to get first dibs on the best trees. I don't want anybody buying something that I want to get. So Bill, of course, isn't at the table because he's involved in the show and the setup and judging. So I'm just waiting. Man, when is he going to come back around? I need to ask him for the price because they didn't have the stickers on anything yet. Looks like they just got done unloading. So I'm walking around the other vendors because I want to leave here with a cork bark pine, and I'm looking at some of the seedlings. Okay, they're around like $250. This guy's got a cork bark pine for $375. These that were similar to Bill's were about $450, and another guy had it for like $1,000. So finally, Bill came back. I asked him what his price was for these cork bark pines. He's like $225. So I'm like, you're kidding me. I instantly, said, all right, I'm going with this one. Take my card. I had to figure out how to set up the tablet. I'm like his first customer because I got to get this pine for that deal. So once again, awesome to see Bill come through and provide me with more of my best trees. Here we have a vendor with a lot of tropicals, and I don't know who it is because I think the sign got cut off in the video, or at least I can't read it in this editor. But he also had cork bark pines, and apparently there's different varieties. So sometimes the bark forms these plates or flakes, kind of more horizontally. Other times it kind of gets more rounded and smoother, like a turtle shell appearance. So I ended up getting one of these other varieties from him for like $150. He had some junipers down here as well. I was considering them, but the trunk was still kind of thin. It didn't really have much taper to it, and the stuff wasn't super developed, so I decided not to get it. But I did get that cork bark pine from him, and it was one of them from that middle shelf there, ran about $150. So this narrow leaf ficus was $300. I thought that was a decent price for a tree this size. I would have liked to get it, except for the fact that I'm not really too into tropicals because I know once I start, I'm just going to be setting up an elaborate grow light setup in my living room for them. So I'm going to stick to conifers for right now. So they had a Japanese white pine up there, and then this Japanese black pine, again a cork bark variety, but the graft on this was just really ugly. You could see it's all smooth bark from the graft down. The roots look kind of funky, and I thought, oh, maybe it'll be more of like an abstract design if I can get it for a cheap price, but it was the grafting scar, just I couldn't do it. It was too weird for me. He had a nice juniper, though, out of my budget, but, shorten that deadwood up and do like 2 to 3 years of refinement on that tree. I think you'd have a really nice looking bonsai. This Japanese white pine, pretty expensive, but if you're wanting to get one and price is no issue to you, you can pick up some really nice Japanese white pines, or at least the past couple of years at the Midwest Bonsai Society show and sale. They've had really nice Japanese white pines. This one was only around 200 something, but at that price I can just get nursery stock, which basically was nursery stock in a fancy pot, so I ended up not getting any of those. These stands were really interesting, but I don't have a tree this small just yet to include in them, so I kind of had no idea what I would even pick. Maybe once I get the tree, I'll think about getting something like this a couple years down the line, because of course the price for these is also a couple $100s. They were running pretty expensive. And there's an example of a display that uses one of these later on in the show that I'm going to include. So this vendor had a lot of nice mid-range conifers. This juniper had a decent trunk, it had dead wood, and I think within 3 to 5 years of letting that foliage grow out and refining it once again, you could have gotten some nice foliage pads and a really decent looking tree. Likewise, this juniper, same story, but it had kind of a weird curve in one of those branches. However, the foliage, it looks like, just one of those blue star junipers from Home Depot. Got that really unique blue foliage on it, so I couldn't get it this year because it was out of budget, but maybe next year I'll get something like that if they have it, because for some reason I kind of like that one. They also had that semi-cascade juniper and then more of this umbrella style looking juniper, $300, so not too bad. You kind of get that really classic looking, almost stereotypical bonsai tree. Wasn't for me, but maybe for someone else, pretty decent tree. That taxus they had up there was pretty good, that yew. And then they had a few Scots pine seedlings for a decent price, but I'm not particularly looking for Scots pine, so I passed on that. They did have cork bark pines, but the price on these was $450, and the scaling on the bark wasn't as pronounced on these as it was on Bill's trees, and Bill had them for $225. So of course I went with the better deal, but if you happen to come to the show after I did and couldn't find one, these would have probably still been there for you. They also had this fantastic looking larch at the show, and I don't know what price it was. It was a couple thousand. It was out of my budget, so I didn't really look. But it was large. The foliage pads already have started to become refined. You have some cones on the branches as well. But I'm going to try and recreate something like this by just taking larch seedlings, planting them in the ground. I've been doing this for a number of years. Then you trunk chop them, and you can kind of see they styled the rest of it out of that first branch. Stuff grows quickly when it's planted in the ground, so I'm going to try and recreate that instead of buying one. This vendor had some pretty decent white pines and junipers. The junipers were around $475, and then the pines, it looks like that one was $2,500, just to give you an idea of the price range. So if you're looking for one and you don't mind the price tag, they've had quite a few nice Japanese white pines the past 2 or 3 years. Then this Yamadori I think is actually a little bit better. It's also like $1,500, so cheaper than the pines. You get a much larger plant, and I think if you throw some wire on something like this, you're going to have a really nice looking tree within a couple of years. The trunk taper, it could be a little bit better, but I mean, really unique characteristic, especially with the dead wood and it being twin trunk. Honestly, I would have loved to come home with that. Or this one, fantastic looking juniper, obviously, a couple $1,000s, but had a nice, smooth, live vein, interesting deadwood, a lot of movement to the trunk. The foliage has already been refined to, a fair amount. And then you also have that deadwood kind of by the apex, so adds a little bit of three-dimensionality to the tree as well. Really would love to have that in my collection. Fantastic looking juniper. So here we're coming up on Bonsai by Fields, and they had a juniper that reminded me of the one we just saw. It was like the budget version for $500, but the trunk was a little bit thin. I didn't really find anything particularly interesting about the style or the aesthetic, so I passed that one up. Now they also had some Japanese black pine, and the one up here in the front was $150, so for a bonsai show, I mean, that's kind of reasonable in my opinion. But the interesting thing was the one right behind it was 975. So I didn't really understand that because, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit more refined, but I mean, not by much. They're kind of almost the same thing. So the price gap in that was a little bit crazy in my opinion. Japanese black pine, almost $3,000. Not something I'm super interested in because I know they grow in the ground for me in northern Illinois without much protection, and I can chop them back and they're good at back budding, so I wasn't really going to spend a whole lot on Japanese black pine. Some nice maples here. The Nabari isn't super great. I mean, the trunk is large, but the roots aren't really spread out in a radial pattern like that first one just kind of had them on both sides. This tree, I don't know what that one was, but it looked like it was, kind of had a huge gap on the left side. Not super refined. The trunks are nice. Again, these are, some kind of broadleaf deciduous trees. I'm more interested in conifers. So I kind of did a once over just so you can see what was at the show. I wasn't really considering any of these just because I'm more interested in conifers, so I didn't really even bother to look at what the species on most of these are. Here we have 3 conifers. It looks like a coastal redwood, a juniper, and a spruce on the end. That spruce was looking particularly good. It is planted on a rock. I have a gray rock that looks similar to it, and I'm looking for the right tree to get and plant on it. But, I would have gotten this one if it was within my budget. Really nice deadwood. It looks really unique. It has more of that wild look, quote unquote, that I'm trying to recreate in some of my trees because I feel like, I don't know, I just like that aesthetic more than more of a nice, refined looking tree. Like, let's say a stereotypical maple. Maybe that's why I like conifers more. I feel like they have that more rugged and wild look with the deadwood you can create on them. Here we had a $200 pine. I don't know what variety this is. I don't think it's a Japanese black pine, but maybe. But who knows? You could have gotten a nice pine like this for $200. But I think that mine, the cork bark for $225 from Bill, was a great deal. I'm gonna finish it with another vendor that had the cork barks, and they wanted theirs for $1,200 for something like this. But I got the same size from Bill from $225. So that's how I'm going to end my show. And those are the trees that I bought. The 2 cork bark pines. Got a great deal. It was a really nice show this year.